It's Triggerman 1976, and I want to begin by thanking you for watching this video, as it will serve as a different way to engage with my blog post, which can be found at triggermanblog.wordpress.com, where I look at matters both theological and philosophical. Also, if you don't mind, please like and share this video, and let me know down in the comments if you found it helpful, if you think this is a format I should pursue on a more regular basis. So with that being said, I guess I should say why I'm making this video. And the reason's fairly straightforward. I'm starting a series on the blog that will serve as a Bible study, and this series will build on concepts that I laid down in an earlier series in the blog, which I'll leave down in the pinned comment below. This series in particular is titled Living Life in Light of the Gospel, and it's drawn from the Epistle to the Romans. In this particular video, though, I'll be laying down some background information on the epistle with regard to its form, any major textual concerns, dating, and author information. So with that in mind, let's dig in. As with any study of the biblical materials, it's a good idea to get some background on the text or circumstances in consideration, and Romans is no different. Understanding the background of a text is important because texts don't exist in a vacuum. And me being a Christian and affirming a doctrine like the doctrine of inspiration means that recognizing the Spirit of God moved men to write in specific circumstances, to specific audiences, for specific issues, because there were things that God desired to say to them in a way that only that writer could properly address due to the experiences they had of God. These words were then preserved in the providential care of God because they were fit to serve His purposes as part of the covenant that He made with mankind in common grace, and especially with those to whom He has given His promise in Christ Jesus. Modern readers, however, will sometimes approach the text with a false assumption, namely that the text was written to us, and this is wrong. We did not live in mid-first century Rome or its suburbs. We do not live under Roman rule. We don't even speak the same language the text was originally written in. We must therefore recognize and read it in light of the fact the text has been preserved for us, because it contains eternal truths that are necessary for the faith. With that being said, let's look at the form of the document that we call the Epistle to the Romans. Now, Romans, unlike other Pauline letters, is a letter that was composed under less than obvious circumstances. If we compare it to something like 1 Corinthians, we can see a marked difference in the style of it, in its substance, and in the focus of its contents. And this is important because in the ancient world that Paul inhabited, there were a number of different types of personal correspondence. So let's look at a few of these. Now, while Romans might be called a letter, the genre of letter refers usually to a brief, very personal level of correspondence that can sometimes contain confidential or personal or private information. If one reads something like 2nd or 3rd John, those would tend to fall under this genre. While all the Pauline writings in the New Testament canon are usually classified as an epistle, the term itself refers to a specific genre of correspondence that is meant to be public and more literary in its style, and a modern equivalent might be the open letter. With regard to the idea of a general epistle, the late 19th and early 20th century German theologian Adolf Diesmans noted, it's an artistic literary form, just like the dialogue, the oration, or the drama. It has nothing in common with the letter except its form. Apart from that, one might venture that the paradox that the epistle is opposite of a real letter. But then there's a third genre, and I think it fits Romans better. And that form is called the letter essay. While often written in the form of a letter, the letter essay is meant to elucidate a particular subject, and it operated more of a didactic or instructional manner. This form seems to be more applicable to Romans, especially since it appears to be constructed to present an apologetic or polemical message. And this is not that the author felt that he needed to defend himself. After all, an apologetic is a generalized defense of a set of beliefs, and there are certain apologetic aspects to Romans. But at the same time, it appears to present something of a polemic, which is a generalized set of arguments against certain beliefs as well. And this gives us a reason to assume that this is reasonable, because the structure of Romans is structured around a number of discrete units within the text itself. These units begin with the opening introduction from chapter 1, verse 1 to verse 12. Then there's a brief narrative in verses 13 to 15 of chapter 1. And then there's a proposition that needs to be considered in verses 16 and 17. And then there's a series of supporting arguments that are argued in favor of the proposition. And these run from verse 18 of chapter 1 to the end of chapter 4, from the beginning of chapter 5 to the end of chapter 8, from the beginning of chapter 9 to the end of chapter 11, and then they wrap up in chapter 12 and chapter 15, first half of it. And then there's two inspiring concluding statements in chapter 15, verse 14 to 16:16. And then there's a second one in 16, verses 21 to 23. Now, we've also noted that it's also been noted that there are a couple of textual interpolations. And this brings us to the matter of textual concerns. And this is because the Greek text in the manuscript edition is reasonably well preserved. So there's a measure of confidence that we can have with the text itself. However, as with any ancient document that went through a hand copying tradition, there are certain facts that need to be addressed. So first, let's discuss the two primary types that are seen in the text. As with any textual document, an ancient document, these were hand copied. And with regard to the sheer number of copies that exist, there's going to be that issue of textual variation. And there's two types. And the first one we'll look at is what's known as the accidental variation. Accidental variations are often errors of sight or hearing, and it really depends on the method by which the copyist is working, whether they're working from an actual physical copy that's before them, or if they're in a scriptorium where it's being read to them, and which would be in more of a mass production type situation in the ancient world. And then if someone was sitting down hand copying it, another one might run into variations in spelling. There was no such thing as standardized spelling in the ancient world, so spelling was pretty free and easygoing. But then you would have instances where an S might be doubled, or an L might be doubled, or letters might drop out. These don't really change the meaning of the text. And then there's another issue, the issue of variation in word order. And this is fairly prominent, but it isn't as important in Greek that's used in the New Testament as in English, because the grammar rules of Greek allow for such instances to exist. And then you've got what's known as an intentional variation. And these can sometimes be troublesome, because you can have an instance where, like an Aramaic name like Miriam in one text can be changed to Mary in another to reinforce an ethnic bias, an anti-Judaistic bias. And then there's also the instance where sexism will creep in and you will have a pronoun, a female pronoun changed to a male pronoun, or the words will be changed to obscure a female involvement. Another example is where a text is ambiguous and it can be applied in various ways or understood in various ways. And so that a copyist who is familiar with the quote unquote orthodox position might tighten up the text to remove that ambiguity. So when it comes to the issue of textual variation, you can see it's not merely photocopying. It's an ancient document needs to be understood in the context. To borrow a line from Hebrews, a cloud of witnesses to that text. So there are some might say, given these facts, we have no certainty with the text, and this just isn't the case. New Testament scholar Gordon Fee has noted it's noteworthy that for most scholars, over 90% of all the variations in the New Testament text are resolved, because in most instances, the variant that best explains the origin of the others is also supported by the earliest and best witnesses. The fact that we have so many manuscripts and we can look at the text and reconcile them gives us the greatest possible confidence in the content of the text. With that being said, what are the major textual issues with regard to Romans? Well, we can determine from the writings of early church fathers that at some point redactions, both additions and subtraction, have been made to the text. Also, the textual tradition itself, we can see notes and other facts that indicate that such have been discovered. One of the first major variations is right at the beginning of Romans, where the identity of the addressee has been added at some point. Also, in some manuscripts, the last chapter, chapter 16, is missing. And then in some cases, it's been noted that both chapter 15 and 16 are missing. Well, there's some reasons for the shortened version, and it's been identified by the apologist Origen, and he identified that Marcion altered Romans to fit his theology. And while this might give us reason to be concerned, the genealogical studies of the text itself have concluded that most likely the original text of Romans ran from 1:1 to 16:1. Subsequent final elements, such as the introductory note from 16:2, became attached through editorial mistakes, while the doxology at 16:24 and 27 possibly came in from its use in liturgical situations. So all this taken together, we have a lot of confidence in Romans as it stands. So what about the author and the date and the purpose of Romans? Well, of course, it begins with the word Paul, the Apostle Paul. And most of our biological information about Paul comes from Acts in the Epistolary. We know that he was from Tarsus, which is a major city of commerce and travel that's located in south central Turkey. He was educated as a Pharisee and is generally believed to have been executed by Nero in or around AD 62. And there's some speculation that he was likely born in the same decade as Jesus. Now, critics will try to often make hay off of some of the chronological discrepancies that exist in between Acts of the Apostles and Paul's letters, but we need to recognize that while Paul is a major figure in Acts, and he featured heavily in over half of its narrative, Acts is not a biography of Paul. Acts is a narrative vehicle to tell us about the early church. So we have to give a little bit of slack there. So what about dating it? Well, we have a general firm date for Romans, and can be ascertained due to several factors from other New Testament sources, um, from Acts and other epistles. And we can generally conclude that it was either composed in the winter of AD 57 or AD 58. This is while Paul is at Corinth, and this is before his journey to Jerusalem for his subsequent arrest. And this date fits in with several factors. The main reason is because the Emperor Nero, early in his reign, instituted a number of positive reforms that really worked in the empire and changed the political structure of things. And it's also prior to the Neronian persecution of Christians, so we can generally date it to those times, and it looks really good. So what about the purpose of Romans? And when it comes to nailing down Romans, what its purpose is, it really comes down to the technical distinction between a letter proper and an epistle. But given the fact that Romans is highly systematic when we compare it to something of similar size, say 1 Corinthians, and that some of the early manuscripts lacked a specific addressee, there are a few possible purposes for Romans, and if we considered it to be an epistle in the letter essay category, then it's meant to serve as a theological treatise with at least two possible aims. Romans seem to be aimed at providing whoever received it with a firm theological grounding. For that reason, some see Romans to be an expansion on certain themes that are found in the much shorter epistle, like Ephesians, which that was intended to be a stock circulating text. So it's likely that Romans fits into that same genre. And then there's the fact that it seems to summarize Paul's teaching. So it was meant to serve as a theological introduction to either to new believers, or as it is an introduction to the Roman church, and so that they receive him and help him prepare for what he later speaks of as a Spanish mission. Given the text a highly rhetorical style, and that it doesn't want to fit into any one particular literary genre, for the purposes of this study, I will treat Romans as that stock theological treatise that could be quickly adapted to serve multiple purposes, be it an introduction, a defense of the content of his teaching, or to serve as a polemic against what's often called the Judaizers, or toward Gentiles who might have been prone to syncretism. So, just to reiterate everything here as we close. As we look at Romans, we look at it as a text that's worthy of study. We think of it not merely as a letter, though that's how it might be portrayed in the vast majority of sermons, if anyone dares to preach on this text. Thinking of it as merely a letter might, in the mind of some, downplay its importance. Rather, I think it would be best to think of Romans, as some have said, as the first systematic theology. But this isn't a sterile theological text. It has personality and a personable nature. We're meant to be drawn in by that friendly opening that reaches out to all who are called to belong to Jesus Christ, Romans 1:6. That in writing it, Paul truly intended to impart to that original audience, and all who would read it, even those living 2,000 years later, some spiritual gift that's intended to strengthen its reader, Romans 1:11. So here's my invitation to you to join me on this study of the Epistle of Romans, and let's pray that we can truly hear Paul's desire to proclaim the gospel, which is the power of God unto salvation to everyone who believes, Romans 1:16. Well, once again, I want to thank you for watching. this video introduction to the study of Romans, and I'm starting at my blog, which is at triggermanblog.wordpress.com. I'll put the link down in the pinned comment below. And if you would like more information, as well as sources used in this video, I'll also link the blog post this video is adapted from below as well. And you can follow me on social media, Twitter and Instagram at TriggerMan1976, and I'm even over on Parler at 1976 TriggerMan. Please like, and if you found this video informative, please share it with your friends. And once again, thanks for watching.